Well, I'd just like to say welcome everybody to CSL, Texas Hill Country, and a happy 4th of July to everybody. And
Woo!
because of the July and the celebration, we're talking about solar power this month. And that's spelled SOULAR, power. And I'm comparing the solar power to the solar power, SOLAR, created by the sun as our summer heat gets heated up. It continues to heat up and get very hot in this area. So but I want to tell you, this theme was motivated as a result of a conversation I had with my grandson, Clark, a few weeks back. And we were talking about that everything was energy. And he said, well, he didn't know so much about that because they couldn't prove it. It hadn't been proven. And I remember that it was Albert Einstein that said everything is energy. And I've heard that recently they've been releasing some of the letters that he wrote to his daughter during the time that he was doing his research and everything. And that but he didn't want them released until after a period of time. But what he's saying in the letters, or so I've heard, is that love is the strongest energy there is. And because energy is at a vibration. And we could all use the energy of our thoughts and words to change its form, is what he has been telling, because energy just changes form. It continues to be energy. And he said that that was not a proven fact. This is what Clark was saying. He said that's not a proven fact because there are not enough research done to prove it. So I decided I would go into our books and find out some of the research and see if I could prove it. And I first of all, of course, went to the Science of Mind textbook, and I love what Ernest Holmes' definition of power in the glossary in the Science of Mind textbook. He says it's the energy by which everything lives. And it is that energy that I want us to tap into this month. And so we're talking about solar, SOULAR, power. And it's the energy that's found deep within our souls. But the question this morning, are you living by that power, or are you living by force? And the question, of course, is inspired by the title of Dr. David Hawkins' book, Power versus Force, where he did research on what the vibrations of different emotions were. And he too proved that love was one of the highest vibrations that it is. So when we're talking about power versus force, I'd like to begin with an example that was given by a colleague of mine in one of the classes that I took. And it's about a dive trip to Cozumel. And it's talking about the difference between power and force. And I want you to look for spiritual lessons in this experience as I'm relating it to you. So how many of you are scuba divers? And scuba divers in the crowd? Well, for those of you who are not, I'm going to give you a little diving lesson. A diver maintains his or her velocity or stability in the water by not going up or going down, but holding steady. And there's two things that they do. The amount of air in their vest, called the buoyance control device, and their breath. So the amount of air in their buoyance control device, which they abbreviated BCD, and their breath. A deep inhale, inflates the lungs, which makes you displace more water and lifts you up. A full exhale deflates the lungs, which makes you displace less water and you sink. So the goal is to have the right amount of air in your vest so that when you breathe normally, you stay steady. And this is called having good buoyancy control. And that's what a good diver does. A good diver has good buoyancy control. And sometimes, as she told it, she said, oftentimes, I'm not that good, she said, when she was telling the story. In fact, she said that she tended to go up and down quite a lot in her scuba diving. And so on this particular trip, she was determined to have better buoyancy control by trying to get the air level just right in her vest and by practicing the breathing to stay steady. Are you getting the picture of this? So she set that intention to have good buoyancy control in this dive, and then did something very important. She became the observer. She became observant of what she was doing. In other words, she was noticing what she was noticing. Notice what you're noticing. And she said, the interesting thing is that she wasn't aware of what she was doing until she set a conscious intention to have better buoyancy control. What she found was that when she started to sink and thought she was going to touch the sandy bottom or maybe even the coral, crash on the coral, she was swimming over, both of which is a diver's no-no. She would take a fast and easy, really, really deep breath in a real gulp of air. But then when she still felt herself dropping, she would become afraid and that she was going to hit something. So she would start to kick to lift herself, or she would reach out her hand to push herself off the ocean floor or off the coral. Now, both of these acts, the kicking and the pushing, are examples of force. Why? Because when you got afraid that she was not going to lift up, by George, she was going to make sure that she didn't crash into anything. So she took control and forced the situation. Does this ring true for any of you? When things aren't happening the way you want them? It's not just for non-divers I'm talking about here. But here's the problem with that situation. She would wind up way overcompensating because the air in her lungs did in fact make her more buoyant and did in fact lift her up. And since she had added her own force to the mix by kicking her legs and reaching out and giving herself a push, she would shoot up like a rocket too high and wind up hovering over everyone. And then when she would have to exhale all the air in her lungs to get back down, and when that didn't seem to work fast enough, she would kick her legs again and sink like a brick. And she should think she was going to crash into the surface again. And the pattern would repeat itself. It was quite exhausting the way she was doing it. So as she was observing this in herself, the next time it felt like she was sinking and about to hit something, she consciously said, stop, don't struggle, don't try to force it. Do what you know to do. And she took a slow, deep breath rather than a big gulp and resisted the urge to reach out and push herself off or kick her legs, which was a very strong urge, she said. After all, that's how she'd been doing her diving for many years, and that's just how she reacted. And lo and behold, within a few seconds, she gently rose, just enough, not too much, on her own. No struggle, no forcing. So shooting up above everyone else because she had overcompensated, none of that happened. The difference was that she allowed the power of the natural law of buoyancy to work. And it worked great. And it was easy and gentle and smooth. In fact, became a lot of fun, she said. So down at 50 feet, she had a two-part aha. The first part was that she just needed to trust herself to do what she had been taught to do. And she wouldn't crash into the coral. So she floated along with this aha for a moment. And then she had the second part, which was even more powerful. And I'm going to say it in her own words. It's not really me I need to trust. I just need to cooperate. What I need to trust is the law of buoyancy. Because of the law of buoyancy, as I inhale air, I will displace more water, which will result in my lifting. And it will do that every time, all the time. It will do that every time, all the time, no exceptions. I don't need to trust or force anything. I just need to trust the law. So I realized that I won't work with the law of buoyancy. It will work with me. So let me shorten that just a bit for a broader meaning. If I work with the law, it will work with me. If I work with the law, it will work with me. Do you see the spiritual implication in this? So let's say that with me, if you will. If I work with the law, it will work with me.
If I work with the law,
it will work with me. Good. And that, my friends, is what the power is. That is what the power is. Emmett Fox, and I'm sure many of you, or most of you, have read about some of his writings, but he's one of the New Thought authors early times. And he once spoke about spiritual sunbathing. And what he said, it applies here, I think, when you talk about spiritual sunbathing. We need to learn to relax spiritually as well as physically. We easily forget that it is the power of God that solves our problems and not our own efforts in the making of our prayers. Spiritual sunbathing offers an excellent analogy here. In sunbathing, you expose the skin to solar rays and then relax and leave it to the sun to do the rest. You never think of trying to help the sun. You relax quietly and have perfect faith that the sun will do its work. In meditating on the presence of God, the same quiet, relaxed, confident attitude will bring the same inevitable result. Because the law works the same all the time. And in this trusting, there is no struggle, there is no force, there's simply an allowing the power that is already there to work. You know, Jesus, our master teacher, clearly taught that spiritual power works through us at the level of our belief. And he implied that it was done unto us by some impersonal principle, which we call the law. And it will work as quickly for one as for another. And the law is no respecter of persons, but works alike for each and all. And Ernest Holmes wrote this in the Science Mind textbook. The law is absolute, and we should trust its impersonal action implicitly. It can do anything for us that we can conceive of it doing. That is the power that is available to us all equally. Sadly, we don't use it productively as often as we could. Most of us are not conscious of our thoughts. And just as my friend was saying about the consciousness of how she was diving, she just reacted in the beginning until she became aware and became the observer of how she was reacting. And she realized that she was reacting out of fear when she would take that gulp of air. And that's what we oftentimes do in our thoughts. We go to that side of fear. We don't deliberately offer thought. Instead, we just let our thoughts drift to whatever is happening around us. Or when we become fearful, we use our thoughts and actions to try to force something to happen. Isn't that what we do? And so when was the last time you used spiritual mind treatment or affirmative prayer for the help with a project? Maybe a meeting with your boss, an interview for graduate school, or a new client or a difficult situation at home or with a friend. That is before you took the matter into your own hands and tried to force the situation. Listen to this. These are some quotes that I came across. A basketball in my hands is worth about $19. A basketball in Michael Jordan's hands is worth about 33 million. A baseball in my hands is worth about $6. The baseball in Mark McGuire's hands is worth 19 million. A golf club is pretty useless in my hands. A golf club in Tiger Woods' hands is how many major golf championships has he won? 8, 10, I don't remember. A rod in my hands might keep away a wild animal, but a rod in Moses' hands parted the mighty sea. A slingshot in my hands is a toy. A slingshot in David's hands is a mighty weapon. 2 fish and 5 loaves in my hands may make a few fish sandwiches. And 2 fish and 5 loaves in Jesus' hands fed thousands. Remember the power you have with spiritual mind treatment. So in whose hands do you want your life? If you keep it in just yours, you'll find yourself trying to force and control situations. If you put yourself in God's hands and trust God's law, you'll put the power of the universe to work for you. Do you get it? It's the power of the universe is at your disposal. And Ernest Holmes wrote this: we are dealing with the same power that molds the planets and all that is upon them, and the limit of our ability to use this power is not in principle, but in our understanding of it. And I'm going to add our use of it and our trust of it. There is a power for good in this universe, and you can use it. And so it is.
So it is.
Wow. Yeah, and it's interesting how that same power can be as powerfully used for stuff that's not good for us. So
And
I
I'd
mean,
like to finish some of the other statements that I found in the
great.
literature too. In fact, Judge Thomas Troward in his Edinburgh lectures, he said, if we realize this from the outset, we shall not undo our own work by endeavoring to force things. For this reason, when the Bible says that he who believeth shall not make haste, it is enunciating a great nature principle that success depends on our using and not opposing the universal law of growth. Our mistakes always eventually resolve themselves into distrusting the law of growth. Either we fancy we can hasten it by some exertion of our own from without, or thus led into hurry and anxiety, not to say sometimes into the employment of previously wrong methods, or else we give up all hope and so deny the germinating power of the seed we have planted. The result in either case is the same, for in either case, we are in effect forming a fresh spiritual prototype of an opposite character to our desire, which therefore neutralizes the one first formed and disintegrates it and usurps its place. The law is always the same, that our thought forms a spiritual prototype, which, if left undisturbed, will reproduce itself in external circumstances. So and that's why we say, concentrate on what you want and not on what you don't want. In other words, if we don't start kicking or pushing, like my friend that did the scuba diving, the spiritual prototype, which is your idea, thought, or desire, must reproduce itself in our external circumstances. That's simply how God works through us in our lives. I mean, do you get it? Do you really get it? Do you live it? Are you living it today? Is there a situation in your life today, right here, right now, that you could turn over to this power? Because remember this, there is a power of good in this universe, and you can use it. You do not have to beg life to be good or to bring good into your life. Life is like the sun. It shines on everything. And you have the power to create life-giving experiences. This is not only your own life. This is life living through you. And this is God living through you. And so this morning, I invite you to use your solar power, SOULAR power. Namaste.
Wow. Yay. I love that. And what's really interesting is back in like the 80s or so, there was a huge trend toward the idea that if it is to be.
Are you guys still there?
Yes.
You can't hear us?